I'd be delighted to do the prayer. So let's open with prayer. Oh God, we are so grateful that you give us companions on this journey of faith, that we don't need to do this on our own, but that we rely on one another's insight into the fullness of who you are, oh God. And so in this night, give us courage and strength and perseverance as we move through these early texts, that your life and your light would shine on us brightly and give us insight into our own lives and the journey that you are calling us into this night. We give thanks for these particular narratives, and we wait for your spirit to guide through Christ. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you everyone for bearing with my technical difficulties here. I'm now on another computer and this seems to be working better. So tonight we're going to start off with looking at the passage on Jacob's reconciliation with his brother Esau. Last week we told you to read chapters 33 through 36, and as I went back and looked at this more closely, you know, this really starts in chapter 32 with the strange tale of the wrestling match, the nocturnal wrestling match, seemingly inserted kind of in the middle of the story of Jacob returning to his brother in the land of Canaan. If you remember, he was up north sojourning with his uncle Laban, and in the process marrying two of Laban's daughters. And so then we went through that whole saga of how they eventually left Laban's household, pilfering his household gods and heading off for the hills of Gilead, where Laban catches up to them, and then they have that encounter where finally they come to terms with each other, and Laban says, okay, go on your way. And so at that juncture in chapter 32, Jacob starts off again for Canaan. He has immediately on the way a what theologians or biblical scholars will call a theophany experience, where God speaks to him through apparently two angels who encounter him along the way, whether it's in a dream or whether it's in tangible reality. We're never really sure. But they seem to be definitely directing him to go back to Canaan and to seek forgiveness from his brother for the nasty things that he did, like stealing his birthright, if you remember all that. I think the best way for us to get into this, first of all, is to have a volunteer who would like to read the story of the nocturnal wrestling match that ensues. So it's chapter 32, verses 22 through 32. We touched on this last week, but we need to re-engage this story because there's a whole lot of business going on here, as we soon will see. Would someone like to read that for us?
I'd be happy to do it. I just have to go and get a copy. Just a moment.
May I read the prayer in 9 to 12 first on the way?
Sure. Yeah.
I just love that prayer.
Okay.
And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, please, from...
We lost you, Ben. Or did you lose? Did I lose you?
I've lost him.
Of my brother,
Okay.
from the hand of Esau.
Okay. And we may refer back to that prayer in what we talk about. But okay, Margaret, if you've now found the spot and you have your audio, if you could pick it up at verse 22 of chapter 32 and read through 32, verse 32.
Okay, chapter 32, verses 22 through 32, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, chapter 32, 22. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and Jacob's thigh was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Tell me, I pray, your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his thigh. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh on the sinew of the hip.
Okay.
Here endeth the lesson.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Penn, for reading those. So, strange story. A rhetorical question that I'll pose to you. Do you think it is just a random insert into the story of Jacob's return to his brother? Or would you agree with Walter Brueggemann, biblical scholar who we keep referring to in this class and his work on Genesis, who says is not randomly inserted in here. It has a theological significance being placed in the middle of the story of reconciliation. Consider that for a moment. You don't need to give me an answer, but reflect on could Jacob have indeed really been reconciled with Esau if he returned to his land unchanged from the scheming conniver that he had been when he left Canaan all those 20-some years ago? Or did something have to change in his mind and in his heart, in his life? Well, Brueggemann would say, yes, indeed. There need to be big change. And far from just being a random travel narrative of his return from up north back to Canaan, this is a very theologically significant way of telling the story. Because Jacob comes out of this nocturnal wrestling match both renamed and empowered in a new way, and yet humbled and limping because of his encounter with this strange being. So here's a question I would like you to maybe we spend a couple minutes thinking about. Why do you think that Jacob's divine opponent in the wrestling match is left mysteriously unnamed, while Jacob comes out of the struggle with a new and symbolically significant name? Because as we're told, Israel, his new name, means one who has striven with God and humans and has prevailed. So as we think about that, who is the mysterious adversary whom he wrestles with on the bank of the Jabbok? Just to throw out a couple of theories, some people say, well, it could be Esau. Could have been Esau. They say it was a man. But then oftentimes angels are referred to as men in the Genesis account and in other places throughout the Old Testament. Or should we understand this to be an incarnation of God, him or herself? Who was this, who he was wrestling with, and why does this divine being stay unnamed?
My quickest reaction is that so we can wrestle with who it is.
There you go. Why shouldn't we be told just outright that this is God in some kind of manifest form?
In Hebrew scripture, God's name was too holy to say. You get that tetragrammaton, and that's enough to know that it's there without being able to say it or write it or do anything with it.
Yeah. If you remember some of your Old Testament, your other Old Testament knowledge, you'll recall perhaps that God does not name God's self for human consumption until Moses at the burning bush out in the wilderness there prior to the Exodus, where Moses, like Jacob, asks, who should I say is going to send me these people? And at that point, God chooses to reveal a handle, you might say, on who he is. Yahweh, I am who I am, which still doesn't really tell you a lot, but it does give you some handle. And as Craig said, they call it the tetragrammaton, the 4 letters, Yahweh, we say in English.
Jewish friends have told me that you get 4 letters, IHWH, and that is a logo for the unspeakably holy name of God. What's this guy's name? It's too holy, you can't write it down. So you take IHWH and you put some vowels in there, and it becomes Yahweh, or it gets Latinized to Jehovah, and it really is kind of that little basis.
Kathy has something.
Yeah, Kathy.
Well, I was thinking we aren't given the name, but we're given what this being was able to do, and maybe that was more the focus of the story. This that it was one who could name Jacob, so name does come into it. It was someone who could bless, and it was someone who could inflict or identify a weakness. So it was the power was in the action, and what we would call that divinity was secondary. One thought.
Can I make a comment about that? I think that's really a powerful insight. And the thing that strikes me about this story too is back to the question of who is God and what are we learning? If it was God, does God wrestle with us? Does God basically displace our hip? I think historically, a lot of people who have come close to God wind up in a wrestling match. They wind up in
which you don't come out unscathed.
Exactly. And I think what it does is it really challenges, at least for me, if it was God or a messenger of God in God's place, or in standing in for God, if you will, you know, what is that there is something that is so powerful in that engagement that you wind up not walking around unscathed. But does God really need to do that to us? You know,
I think you can't have an interaction with God without being unscathed. I think that's the message.
Say that again, Alan.
You can't have an interaction with God without being unscathed.
Got it. Thank you.
It changes you. And I really like the notion that he rejoices having survived, right? The normal facing of God would be fry because it's too brilliant and too bright to behold.
Right. So, and that's all. Go ahead, please.
I think the other perspective is that if you think of wrestling matches, they're very intimate encounters. You know, you got legs and arms going every which way. So it's not God at a distance and Jacob on the ground. It's a very personal, intimate contact, which I think, you know, is meaningful. And then when the whatever that is that's wrestling with Jacob says, you know, what is your name? He forces, and Jacob says, my name is Jacob. He essentially forces Jacob to admit that he has been a trickster his whole life. And at least that's, you know, one possibility. And then when he admits he's wrestled, he's had this intimate encounter, he admits he's a trickster, then he gets the new name and the transformation, at least, you know, as one possibility.
So this, yeah, Allison.
At some level, could it also be seen as sort of an ultimate struggle of Jacob's conscience? You know, a very deep internal thing that manifests though with these sort of external expressions.
Yeah, if someone else had stayed on that side of the Jabbok River with them, would they have seen anybody, or would he have been like flipping around in his sleep? And this is an effective kind of experience that he's having.
Yeah. And then the next morning, gee, what's wrong with your leg? I slept on it funny.
So I do have to make one little footnote here that oftentimes in Hebrew in the Old Testament passages, when someone grabs your thigh, when someone grabs a man's thigh, the inside of the man's thigh, this is a euphemism for grabbing something slightly higher. He's got him by the short and curlies, we might say. It's, you know, who knows, but it's a very, as someone mentioned, it's a very intimate kind of struggle here. And Jacob comes out of it wounded, but the struggle is kind of a draw in that it says that when the divine being realized that he was not going to prevail over Jacob, he then knocks his hip, shall we say, out of its socket, and then gives him, I should hold there to say, but still in the match, Jacob then is, you know, still hanging on to whoever this is and says, you need to bless me before I'm going to let go of you. I won't let go of you until you bless me. So God doesn't respond just directly, but says, well, I'm going to give you a new name. And your name is going to be Israel, which describes your relationship both with the divine and the human, that you are one who strives with God and with humans and prevails, at least to the degree that you come out of it alive instead of with your eyeballs fried or dead. But you may be quite a different person now as you approach your brother Esau. So something else I wanted to pick up on this. So Jacob comes away empowered for a new life, but he's changed and he's hobbled and he's lost some of his initial arrogance. And in the prayer that Penn read for us, he seeks God's mercy. He reminds God, now remember, God, you said you're going to bless me, and I'm asking you in that blessing to be merciful to me and allow me to survive the encounter with Esau, because I'm sure he's ticked and he's been working on that for 20 years. And it's probably not going to go very easily when I meet him. So please, God, remember what you said to me, that you were blessing me and going to give me a future. That means I'm going to survive this. I'm going to get through this. Just letting you remember that, God. So Jacob has not let go entirely of his manipulative behavior, even in this new configuration. Yes, he's seeking God's mercy. Yes, he's seeking his brother's forgiveness, but he's still trying to stage manage it. And we'll also see in the details of the next part of the story how he, he's got all these sheep or goats or both traveling along with him and his big family of 11 children or whatever it is. And he divides them up, puts a vanguard out front with the Leah family, keeps Rachel more, and particularly his favorite son, Joseph, in the back of the crowd, where they're most protected. But they're to go on ahead, all these flocks and herders and family members. And when they first encounter Esau, they will tell Esau, we belong to your brother Joseph, who's coming along here. And they bow down to Esau. They put themselves at Esau's disposal because Jacob is offering them as an appeasement gift. An interesting detail that Brueggemann brings out about this, it wouldn't have occurred to me just reading it through. I don't know if it did to you. Jacob is still trying to impress Esau with the size of his herds and the size of his family. This is not some shoddy little gift to you. I, Mr. Successful Jacob, am returning home, offering you a substantial appeasement gift, very substantial. So hopefully you will accept it and you will forgive me, since it's such a great gift that I'm giving you. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's going on here? So I wanted to pose the question another way, perhaps. When we consider Esau's response to Jacob's effort at appeasement, what is the importance of accepting someone's gift, even if you really don't need it and you don't expect that they really have to do it? If you're magnanimous and just want to, receive them, welcome them, and yet they're offering you a gift, is it important to take it? And if so, why?
Well, I really think that that Esau was ready to forgive, and he was standing with his arms wide open. Jacob thought that he was a goner. I mean, he was trying to get, bargain with God, and but he thought he was a goner. And so he lines everybody up. And sure, it's about trying to impress still Esau, but I really think Esau, it was almost like that became a distraction for Esau. It became kind of like, well, fine. I mean, so you got it. Well, so do I. I'm wealthy too. So we've done well. But the deal is that you are my lost brother and you're back, and I am willing to forgive you. And then that powerful moment of, I see the face of God in your face. So it's almost like all that it's such an incredible lesson to recognize that when we have been harmed or we have harmed someone else and you come face to face with them and all the all the things that you kind of set up to say, okay, I'm going to go and ask forgiveness of this person. I'm going to bring flowers and candy and a nice dinner. And we're going to be sitting down and we're going to really it's going to be okay because I'm going to just have all the trappings. And what's going on here is that he comes in and all that just evaporates because he sees the face. Now, am I romanticizing this? Maybe, but that's what I.
But
maybe,
Lucy, we should also note that Jacob insists again. He says, "No.
I know.
All gifts for you." Esau said, "No. I don't need them. You know, I'm fine. No. Please accept my gifts." And so then Esau does. So what happens in that?
I felt that his acts were so heinous to his brother. He really did not believe in a million years he would be forgiven. So he came with all this falderall. And it's an interesting thing. It's like, you know, are we able to receive grace without feeling we have to do something in order to receive it, you know?
I think too that Jacob really expected Esau not to be doing that well and was kind of disappointed that Esau was doing that well.
There you go.
No,
yeah.
really. So
yeah,
the gift would have meant more to Esau if he needed it.
Right.
But once he found out he didn't need it, he still had a pressure. I mean, I think we have all had mother-in-laws who's given us Christmas gifts that we don't want. But I mean, and I'm sure I've given people gifts, not herds of goats, that they don't want, but it's very ungracious as a person not to accept the gift.
Right.
And it's sort of demeaning to the person that's given it to you. So I think Esau on his part had to sort of accept the gift, but I really do think Jacob thought that it was going to be more meaningful to his life because Esau was more down and out than he turned out to be.
I think go ahead.
I think part of, as I was thinking about this, I noticed that Jacob always refers to himself as your servant, Jacob. So I interpreted that as really meaning a change of heart, more, I think, in line with how Lucy was interpreting it. And, you know, I think when Esau when you accept a gift, you're kind of acknowledging that the person who gave you the gift cares for you, that they cared enough about you to give you something, even, you know, as Charlotte's brought up, sometimes, you know, it isn't exactly what you're looking for, but, you know, you acknowledge that, you know, it kind of, it mends the rest of the rift, I think, between the two brothers.
Yeah, I agree. It seems to me that if somebody humbles themselves enough to go through all those steps that Jacob went through to try to mend the rift, that Esau or anyone in his shoes needs to accept, you know, ultimately accept and be gracious in order for that healing to occur.
I still feel like Esau is the one who comes the farthest. That even in this final thing where he's accepted it and but then he offers to send some people along with Jacob, understanding that they'll have to go slower, and Jacob doesn't really accept that and goes on, and it's not even clear to me if he necessarily goes where Esau thinks he's going to be going.
He's still
like he's headed off somewhere else, and it's like, ooh.
He's still being deceptive.
Yeah.
So we don't know the story of Esau and how he came to the place that he is at
That's right.
when he meets Jacob.
So what got into Esau that changed his mind, his heart?
Yeah, that's been your question all week, Tom. I mean, because we work on these texts all week. And Tom keeps asking a question. Well, what happened to Esau in this? So you're right, Linda. That is that backstory that we don't know unless it was Esau who took after him across the river. I mean, it's sort of interesting to even play with that one. But go ahead. Go ahead. Alan, and I think Margaret had something.
For me, it was interesting that Esau had mainly, local wives. And yet Jacob had, wives back from the homeland. So Esau, in my view, was like desperate to have people from the homeland to be with and meet and be back in kinship with. So to me, I thought that was part of Esau's motivations. I really don't know, but.
If you think back to the earlier part of the story of the birthright thing, Esau is just basically a nice guy. I mean, I might read it that way. I don't know if you would too, but it seems like he didn't do anything wrong. I mean, he was wronged, but he maybe has a bit of a temper. Wouldn't you, if your brother had done that to you? But nice guy. He's sort of, in a way, maybe sort of simple. It's like he hadn't figured out that marrying 2 Hittite wives would upset his parents. But when he realizes that they're telling his brother Jacob to go up north and find a nice girl from the tribe, maybe he should do that too. It's like he's not the sharpest tack in the box, but he's just basically a nice guy. He does what he needs to do, and he realizes, if we're going to have a future together, we're going to have some reconciliation here. So, and he's my brother, for God's sake. Kathy.
I think I really appreciate, I get some insight just hearing everyone. And I think Esau was prepared to forgive or had forgiven before the request. It seems as I think about this, that it was Jacob who had more of the need to be forgiven than Esau seemed prepared or ready or had already come to terms with it from a forgiveness. And similarly with the gift, that it was Jacob who needed to give a gift, obviously, more than Esau. And I'm seeing it sometimes, this forgiveness, this amazing forgiveness, I've thought of this as boy, this really went well. But as we break it down here, there have been a lot of steps in this to get to the point. And especially in my mind, this Jacob being humbled and being limping, being a little less perceptively strong in order to have something really good happen in this forgiveness treatment.
And I want to segue us on that, and we're going to move it on a bit quicker, perhaps, so we could spend all night talking about this. But question, what does it mean to us to be the, shall we say, spiritual heirs of Israel? The way that Jacob is named Israel, to be blessed but bruised, bowed down and forgiven, and empowered that way. Does that sound kind of like familiar to some Christian theology?
Suffering servant.
Suffering servant. Certainly, in fast forwarding to the New Testament, Penn, you have a reflection on that.
Is my audio
yes,
working?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I mean, it's not a type. It's not a point for point type, but there's something of Jesus here.
Yeah.
I come, I'm wounded. He says yes. And then I say, can I give you something? And he says, no, it's just there for you. And then it looks like I really see it's sort of a conversion. I see the face. And then I can give him a blessing. We can exchange blessings. There's something, it's not deliberate, of course, in the text, but bringing a Christian perspective to it can make it a little bit more layered.
You see how this could have developed out of this understanding from Judaism, a sense of power in vulnerability, God's power expressed in forgiveness and vulnerableness. So finally, I just want to make one little point, and maybe you all would have caught this. What young boy is there watching this happen, who we're going to read about next 2 weeks?
Joseph.
Joseph, yeah.
So if you've read ahead and you know what happens, or from Sunday school, you know what happens. In the Joseph story, Joseph learned this behavior from his uncle Esau. Speculation, but might be. So I'll plant that seed in your mind that you might read our stuff for next week and the following week with that kind of percolating in the back of your mind. I want to flip it over to Lucy now so we can talk at least somewhat about the Dinah story and so on in chapter 34. Lucy.
Well, it's sort of a big shift, it seems, but it really is a bridge, this story of Dinah, the rape of Dinah. And it seems, if you read about the reconciliation, then you get to this story, and it feels like another one of those sort of insertions, like it wasn't really, it didn't really lead out of where we were, and it doesn't really lead to where we're going, but it sort of does. So let me talk just a minute about what I think is going on here. And it's not my thought. I mean, I've read quite a bit about this, but in that story of Dinah, first of all, of course, Dinah was one of Leah's daughters, right? Not Rachel's daughter. And she was maybe the only daughter, if I read that correctly. And so they're in this place. So what's a little confusing about this is that it is pretty likely that Dinah was a real person and that Shechem was a real person, but this is all symbolic pretty much. I mean, the assumption is that what we're really talking about here is defilement, not just of an individual woman by another outside man who desires her, but also rapes her. But it really is, if you take it more symbolically, that it's really about cultural engagement between the people of Israel, the people of Jacob, if you will, encountering a new culture and trying to figure out where their identity gets absolutely clearly formed and is being formed, but it's a vulnerable identity because they have yet to form themselves as a nation. They're moving into territory, into a land, Shechem, person and land, city, where they're going in and they're trying to establish themselves. And Brueggemann basically says that Jacob was homeless. I mean, he was on a journey, but he didn't really ever have a land that was his own. He had lands, he landed places and, amassed great wealth, but every day. And so trying to find his way into a land. And what is happening here, if you can kind of stay with the symbolics of it, is that you've got people who are establishing their identity, encountering other, and winding up in a situation of ritual defilement, if you will. So the things they're holding so important is getting taken away from them by violence in some ways. I mean, that's what was going on here. But the odd thing about this story that I think is really fascinating is, number one, Jacob does not have any role in the story until the very end. And then he sort of shakes his head and says, I'm really sad this happened. My sons, you know, went out and they basically put into the mind of the people, made a deal with them and said, if you get circumcised, then you'll be one of us and you can come in the fold and we'll all be a happy family. And they were willing to do that. I mean, I think they did it with good consciousness. They didn't just say, oh yeah, we'll do it. Yeah. But there also was an economic gain at the base of it. So this is one of those very complicated stories. It kind of sounds like, you know, the negotiations that are happening out there in Washington right now in terms of trying to figure out, okay, is this really about people, or is this about politics, or is this about a new nation, or is this about an immigrant community that's coming in and trying to establish itself, and who are we and who were we and where are the boundaries? I mean, very complicated. So granted, yes, there is a woman, and granted, yes, there is a pursuer who really at a whole level, on another level, really wanted to marry her and really wanted to have a relationship with her, a healthy relationship with her, not a violent relationship. But if you can put it in the context, it's also about a kind of engagement with the people and where are the restrictions and the boundaries. So I think that in a way is a way to read this story. And it is not as random as maybe I made it sound at the beginning, because what then happens is that the establishment, we're beginning to anticipate the need to begin to establish oneself as a community with very specific parameters about what we will and what we don't do. And the ending of the story is sort of interesting because after Jacob basically says, oh my gosh, you killed all these people. Here they did what you asked them to do, and you went ahead and slaughtered them after they were circumcised and hurting from their circumcision. And then, you know, the sons then come back and say, well, our sister was made into a harlot. And so you can almost see here, on the one hand, the kind of excuse for basically taking a very, very radical and really disturbing action. And on the other hand, they still didn't get what the real issue was, that it wasn't about the sister getting raped by this man, but it really was about their violence toward the people that they were, you know, that they were reacting to. And it's just in a way a pretty tragic story. I mean, it's tragic from the outset, and in some ways it's tragic in the way that it ends because they never learn. They never come to
I thought it was interesting that Jacob, his reaction is not, boy, we got those SOBs. No, it's like, oh my God, do you realize that you have spoiled everything by doing this? Because we have to live as a minority among these people, and you think they're going to trust us? Oh my gosh, you know, you numbskulls, look what you did. That's kind of his response.
Yeah.
I was struck, Lucy, toward the end, where after the Israelites kill all the men, it says they carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. So in essence, they do something similar. They take the women and children against their will. It was a little bit mind-bending at the end.
Yeah. I mean, it's the spoils of war. And I mean, it really is. It's just this horrible, horrible thing that we just see historically happen over and over and over again. It's like the people who are harmed end up turning around and harming in similar ways. Thank you for that insight, Joy. Yeah. What else?
We also never find out whether the sister would have agreed to this. I mean, she doesn't even have any voice in it. The sister that was raped never says, okay, I'll marry him or I won't. I mean, not that you probably did in that society anyway, but it was kind of, you know, disarming to me in that way. And I hope that we're finally getting away from circumcision.
We've had a lot going on with circumcision.
For me, you know, this was to me a very interesting consequence of Jacob not accepting the forgiveness of Esau. You know, had he truly accepted the forgiveness and come back home, this might have gone a different, totally different path. So it was, you know, because I visioned this branch on the road. He says, I'm going with you, but then whoop, detour.
That's a really fascinating thought. What else strikes you about this? Some of you who haven't had a chance to share tonight, is there anything that's coming to you? I'm not going to call on people, but yeah, Penn, did you have something?
Someone remarked to me that
we can't hear you again. Sorry, Penn. There you go. I always sort of hang waiting. Penn, you were, we didn't hear what you said because you broke up.
I think John 4, where Jesus meets the woman at the well, is Shechem. It's called Sychar.
Right.
But I think
right.
Yeah, I think it's the
same place.
Yeah.
So Jesus.
Oh. Yep. That's really, did you all catch that?
Jesus treat very different.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's a really fascinating connection.
The connection being the forgiveness, then that he came back to a place where forgiveness had happened before, and maybe that was why the disciples were so scandalized that you're here and you're forgiving too. What?
Yeah, there was this long-seated hostility between the Samaritans who were there at that time in Jesus's day, maybe going all the way back, who knows, to these forebears in Shechem.
Yeah, and even from the idea of Joseph growing up seeing his uncle and his father like that, this I once heard somebody say that the very strongest sentence in the world is, "We have always done it this way."
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this whole saga? I think that it was interesting, Penn, that you were so moved by that initial prayer and the engagement with God early on that then led up to the wrestling and the reconciliation. It's really a very, I don't know, right in the middle of our discussion tonight, I just had this kind of deep sense that we are on sacred ground here in these reconciling moments, and that in some ways the harm that, you know, we feel like we've treaded over the difficulties and all of the divisions that are afoot these days. It just feels like this message, if nothing else in the entire text of Genesis, that we need to hear about reconciliation and forgiveness, and seeing the face of God in another person. Doesn't that feel like a powerful message?
It does.
And so that reconciliation, we've seen it 3 or 4 times in what we've read.
And Rick Worthy, not because I'm not.
Yep. Go ahead, Linda. Did you have something else?
No, that's my sentence.
It's really true, isn't it? Yeah, that's your sentence.
The other point is that reconciliation takes a long time. It's not an instant thing. They're not truly reconciled until the death of Isaac. I found that interesting. That's when they finally come together as a family,
cooperate,
and you know, do the right thing. So it was very, you know, it's a time, very time intensive. You know, you can't reconcile in an instant.
Right.
And also, doesn't God tell Rachel that Jacob is going to be the one and he's going to be above his father, above his brother? Right. So maybe when Jacob just sees Esau doing well, and that he also can see that not only on the face of God, but God has treated him kindly and treated him well, and he can be a little relieved that no matter what he didn't really destroy his brother, that his brother got what God intended for him to get all along.
And I wonder sometimes about accepting the gift in that case. It isn't, I'm going to accept it because I need it, but I'm going to accept it because then you will have less. Not saying that's the answer. I'm just saying that's made me wonder.
Yeah.
Well, the effect is that it equalizes the playing field, levels the playing field a bit, so that they can engage with each other on a new and healthy basis.
Yeah. Sylvia has her hand up.
Thank you.
I found myself as I was wrestling with this, thinking, man, we sure are slow to learn. I mean, it's been quite a while, and we could write a modern day Genesis, I would imagine, and still find lessons that we as God's people are struggling to learn. Yeah. And then I got tired and I ran out of time. And often when that happens, I think about the awesome mystery of God, Paul Tillich's phrase about the mysterium tremendum. If I said that even if we're close to correctly enough that you could understand. So I really appreciate the opportunity to struggle with this and to just keep praying that we do it better.
Yeah.
Well, in my view, we are saving the best part of Genesis till last. We're gonna, I'll speak for myself. I love the story of Joseph. It's a long story. It's got a lot of details, and we're dividing it up. You may want to read the whole thing. We won't stop you if you do, but next week we're saying read chapter 37, starting verse 1 through chapter 44, verse 34, which is up until the moment of reconciliation. So sets the stage. And then our last week, we will have a chance to really explore more of these facets of what happens for reconciliation.
In case I run out of time again, would you say those two different sections?
Yeah. So read for next week, chapter 37 through chapter 44, verse 34. And then the week after that, we will take it on to the end of Genesis.
And it goes fast. It really goes fast. I mean, it's like reading a little, novelette. Yeah. So it's a good thing. I think one more parting thought is I would like for you, as you're kind of walking out of this room tonight, or however we want to talk about this, closing down the room, for you to carry forward again the thought of what have been all of the places so far. Someone raised this, but I think it's a really interesting point of basically wrestling with God and reconciliation with God. And is there something in the nature of the God that we worship and adore that really asks more of us than we maybe think we have ourselves, by really putting us in a place of having to wrestle and having to be present to God in a way that is full and rich, but also pretty like the mystery, the terrifying mystery that is at the core of who God is as well. And I think sometimes we want to say, well, that's the Old Testament God, and we get to the New Testament and it's this kind of cozy, loving. Well, I think next spring, we're going to do probably one of the Gospels, and we're going to get a little bit into some of that God that may be a little more complicated than we realize. But I do think the point is, look back again, just kind of browse back through the Genesis up to where we are right now and just see what have been those points where there is this wrestling and then this reconciliation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because this all ties together. It's brilliant. It all ties together. I mean, needless to say, but it does. So,
if I may, when I picked up my Bible to come and do the reading, I saw a cartoon that I clipped and put right into Genesis 1. It's two angels talking to each other. Let me see if I can get it on the camera. I don't think so. No, it's not going to work. But imagine two angels up in the clouds and bright light in the left hand of that. And one angel is looking on a little confused, and the second angel is gesturing out to him and saying, he says, let there be light, and there is light. That's credibility.
There you go. There you go. Beautiful. Well, would someone be willing to close us with prayer tonight? I know it's a little scary, but it's fine.
I could go on from there if
Margaret, go. Okay.
Beautiful. Okay.
Thank you.
Beloved and credible God, you say something and it happens. That's credibility. And that's worth loving. We know it's a different time frame than what we have, and we wrestle with you for it sometimes. Thank you for these family stories that we're sharing. Thank you for sharing these moments with us as a family. Guide us now through the week and through another story until we can come and discuss again. Be with us, guard us, and keep us safe. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. And it would be a wonderful thing to just sort of hold each other in the light this week as we move forward through our lives. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.